Maximum Downforce on Downforce Radio, brought to you by Classic Race Simulators.
Go, go, go! Any time and immediately! This is amazing! The worst start for a Grand Prix that I have ever seen in the whole of my life. He's out of the race! He's out of the race! Oh my goodness! This is fantastic!
And I've got to stop because I've got a lump in my throat.
Your champion has been crowned, and in the true fashion of 2021, it couldn't be any more controversial. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Maximum Downforce, and for the second time, brought to you by Classic Race Simulators in Farnborough. Joining me, as always, Mr. Jake Sanson and Miss Lisanne Dijk. Guys, what a race, what a weekend, what a season. We're not going to be focusing on the season as a whole this time. We're leaving that for the season review, which is going to be coming out in a few weeks' time. So remember, everyone listening to stick around for that as well. Jake, season end boiled down to equal points, boiled down to nothing at all. It was like there wasn't a season whatsoever. The background and the actual events of the race, you could tell that there was a year long of racing after this.
Absolutely. I mean, whichever way you look at it, whoever was going to win the World Championship, it was one of those kind of seasons. It's never really been as fever pitch as this before. I think the success of Formula One through social media in the modern era has never really given it a platform as intense and as strong as this. And as a result of that, it was always going to be unbelievably close between the two factions when, this is the first time in the hybrid era that two teams have been able to pitch a driver each to go head to head for the title. Ever since 2014, it's been a Mercedes driver at the final race that can win the championship or has already won it. So, this is the first inter-team title battle for a driver's championship since 2012 going into a season finale. So it was always going to be very, very emotional, very, very contentious. But the drama and the power play over the course of the season is what has characterized this championship, and it could not have ended in a more controversial manner, which I suppose is very befitting of 2021 because it has been controversial pretty much since the beginning of the season.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you said there, Jake. You pretty much hit the nail on the head. But Lisanne, we mentioned equal points. This is the first season finale in Formula One history since 1974 to head into the final race on equal points. Really no surprise that the viewing figures in certain countries were the highest they've ever been.
Yeah, I think it's great to see. I mean, on the side, it's a World Cup in the end, and I think that a lot of Dutch fans seen it that way. It was broadcasted for free in both countries, I think in both in Britain and in the Netherlands, and it brought this country like patriotism, like we were so all ruling for it. And it was really nerve-wracking until the end. I mean, at one point, I think certain people thought it would be Lewis, and then everything changed around. And it's great, to bring in new people. Maybe not the greatest time to bring them in, like we can talk about that later. But it's, the race had, of course, a little bit of weird ending. But it's beautiful. It was a beautiful finale. It should have been a beautiful end for Formula One to have it so close until the end. What actually makes the battle even bigger, and I think it just looks great for the sport. That wasn't just a domination from one person anymore, even though maybe it would have been better in certain circumstances. But in the end, this season was a gift, but it had a little bit a bad aftertaste, I think. And I think Jake said it really well. Yeah, it's really controversial, and we will be talking about this. I thought in a couple of years when we're all in a lot of years when we're all in our nursery homes and we're talking about that 2021 final.
Yeah, although obviously we are building up to Christmas, on the other hand, it almost brings out the taste of Halloween. There's a treat, but also a bit of a trick at the same time. So, Merry Christmas to everyone, by the way, who as we're building up to this. It's probably going to be the last time this podcast is out until Christmas Day. So, look forward to seeing you in the new year as well. But either way, this year, focusing on this year, Jake, I don't know if you saw qualifying. I know you caught up to the practice sessions especially, but I'm not sure. I assume you saw qualifying.
I did, yeah. And I have to say, the right guy got pole position. You know, it was always going to be very, very close between the two drivers. And it was so critical going into qualifying because this circuit has a reputation of whoever gets pole position ends up winning. So it was always very, very important, I think, for the psychological power play to get the pole position. So for Max to get pole, I think it was fantastic from him. He produced a mega lap and the whole team executed their strategy brilliantly. They decided to gamble to start on softs while obviously Mercedes were going to go medium for the start of the race, and it set up a fantastic show. But I do think Max Verstappen produced the ultimate qualifying lap, and that was for me the sign that he was ready to become world champion. I think there's been a few times this year where he's pushed the limit, where he's been able to showcase his real raw ability, but he's made a few decisions under pressure that have kind of characterized him as, you know, a bit desperate, a little bit inconsistent, and a little bit trigger happy, particularly when it comes to overtaking moves or defensive moves. So his performance in qualifying on Saturday, that to me spoke of a man who had shaken all of that off and was ready to be a world champion. He did a lot of soul searching by the look of it over the last 7 days. And he didn't need to resort to silly, stupid tactics this weekend. There were none. And I think no matter what we're going to talk about later on in regards to how the race was officiated, one thing that has to be said, and I've had my criticisms about Max Verstappen in the past, this weekend he was exemplary. He was absolutely on form this weekend, and he deserved, as a man and as an athlete, to be world champion. So you have to offer congratulations to him right from qualifying. He absolutely looked like the genuine article.
Lisanne, Jake mentioned there that the circuit is often a track which is renowned for its pole position to win conversion rate. And although the man who started on pole did end up winning the race, it wasn't him who led into the first corner.
No. I think Max's start was not great. His reaction times was a 10 slower than it was Lewis's reaction time. I think Lewis had a perfect start. Like, he immediately was on it and went in, and that was really good for them. I think this season we have seen that Lewis had some bad starts, especially in Monza this year. And I think to see him take that, I thought that was already kind of championship defining the moment as soon as he was in the lead while being on mediums versus the soft tires that Max was on. I thought this could have been already decided at this moment, but Max kept up, and that was really well to see until we, of course, had the overtaking moment where things went a bit south, and Max pushed Hamilton off the track. There was not a lot of space, and then, of course, re-entered the track off track in front, and there's a lot of controversy. So even if the whole end thing with the safety car didn't happen and Lewis had won, I still think there would be controversy about what happened in the first lap with the overtaking, because that was also questionable in comparison to last week. And I think whatever the outcome would have been, that was already a moment that I was like, oh no, this will be a long-lasting thing that we have to talk about, because Red Bull will appeal it if Lewis would have won.
This is where we start to get to the controversial elements, and the first bit where we see the FIA begin to poke their ugly nose into this World Championship battle. You see, heading down into turn 6, Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton battling as though they always will. Max Verstappen dives up the inside of Lewis Hamilton. Frankly, I do have to say, would have been a fantastic move if Lewis had not cut across the track. Now, what your opinions are on this, personally, I don't care. Because my opinion on the situation is, Lewis, by my reckoning, should have given that position back. Because he cut across the circuit, he kept the position, he didn't give back all of the advantage gained. And that is a fact. Because Max was alongside into the corner, Lewis was around, I'd say about 5/10 ahead of him there, Jake.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. I think, I've gone on record in the past of being more of a Lewis Hamilton supporter than a Max Verstappen supporter. But you have to say that move from Max on lap 1, perfection, textbook. I mean, that was the latest of all late braking maneuvers. And from my side, you're fighting for a world championship. You're not going to go half-hearted. You have to go for that gap. Ayrton Senna, we keep mentioning this diatribe every time. If you don't go for a gap that exists, you're not a racing driver. So from my side, Max Verstappen absolutely left nothing on the table there in that move with Lewis. But as Christian Horner rightly stated, he was within the white lines. He had given enough room to make sure that he was coming alongside Lewis. Once he was in front, he didn't have to leave any space for Lewis at all. So from my side, there was no contact between them. And a lot of people have said, oh, they've hit each other. No, they didn't. There was no contact at all between the two drivers there. And Max, for me, had the move on. That was a magic move. The kind of move that a world champion makes once in a lifetime. And for me, that was absolutely a race-winning overtake. And if he had made that move stick and kept the position, I'm actually not so sure this whole controversy would ever have come up. So I think the FIA actually caused all this by basically... The only way I can look at it is that obviously in Brazil, you had a similar incident where, Verstappen forced Hamilton off the track when Hamilton was in front and then obviously took the position back and they didn't do anything about it. So I kind of feel that they had to do the same thing here with Hamilton to sort of even the score. But that's not really a position they need to be in. They shouldn't be putting themselves into a position of, well, we were unfair in Brazil, so now we need to be unfair in Abu Dhabi to even up the playing field. That's a mistake. And that's where the inconsistency has become prevalent. So I understand why they did it, if that's the reason why they did it. But the problem is they backed themselves into a corner where they had to kind of say, well, in Brazil, we got it wrong. So here in Abu Dhabi, we have to get it wrong. And, it's one in each ballpark then. So for me, that was the overtaking move of the season for Max Verstappen. And again, proof that he deserved to be world champion. But it's just so ridiculous how it's ended up going.
Lisanne, when I saw that incident and I saw the reaction afterwards, most people saying, oh yeah, but Max didn't leave Lewis any space. But by that reckoning, if Lewis is this godly 7-time world champion, which let's face it, Lewis Hamilton is one of the greatest of all time, if he was really in his own game there, he would have realised that Max Verstappen was going to do that. I would have realised that Max Verstappen was going to overtake me if I had Max Verstappen behind me, especially if we're fighting for a world championship, and the key to his strategy is staying ahead of me. Why did Lewis not brake early, allow Max to dive up the inside, and then simply cut back on him? I understand it's a millisecond moment for them. Arguably, they can make those split sessions. They are supposed to be able to make those split-second decisions that we cannot.
Yeah, they should. I mean, the one thing you should know as a Formula One driver is to close the doors and know what's happening. Think before you do something. But it looked like it almost took him by surprise that he didn't see Max almost, and then got pushed really wide. And it made in another extent, like, was he scared to crash out? I mean, there have been instances this year where they would have crashed or would have crashed, and I think that if that happened, like, let's say both of them would have crashed and they really touched, then Max would, of course, have taken a championship. And I think that's maybe the reason why Lewis went wide and not really attacked or did something like pushed a little bit more. And didn't brake earlier. I think that could have been it, because that was the thing. The whole consensus before this weekend was that nobody was scared that the FIA would meddle into this, maybe in different ways. The thought was, what if Max and Lewis crash? That was the whole week. All I heard was about that. Like, what if they crash? And I think that maybe Lewis was a bit scared of crashing out. Max is sometimes just a bit more aggressive, takes the chances, is not scared for a crash sometimes. And I think that was the reason he was more careful and took it wider. And yeah, that is the only reason I could see that happen. But it was surprising what happened. And I think if Lewis would have won, this would have been the moment we were talking about. But yeah, things turned around in the end. I mean, I was mostly watching with a lot of people that are Red Bull fans, and they were all in uproar. But this is what, like, the FIA supports Mercedes, and I was like, okay, yeah, it's a bit a double standard. We saw the same in Brazil, but yeah, it would have been a totally different conversation if Lewis had won.
So Lewis Hamilton continues on in the Grand Prix until eventually Max Verstappen makes his first pit stop for hard tyres. Now, surprisingly or unsurprisingly, depending on the way you look at strategy, Mercedes opted to cover Red Bull off, which essentially left the ball in Red Bull's park as whether or not they would deploy the two-stop, which obviously they went on to do, but wouldn't have that much of an effect on the Grand Prix. Either way, Hamilton covers Verstappen off. And Red Bull leaves Sergio Perez out on the circuit. Now, Jake, I have never seen defense on 20-lap-old soft tyres compared to fresh hards. I think that race has just cemented Sergio Perez as one of the best number 2 drivers, if not the best defenders in the sport at the minute.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing. People have been underrating Sergio Perez's quality for a long, long time. And Red Bull absolutely have a lot to give Sergio Perez credit for this, because, you know, he has totally outclassed Valtteri Bottas as a number 2 this year. He's been absolutely on song whenever he can be. He's had a lot of points stripped from him through bad luck and misfortune. Jeddah is obviously one that's very much in the mind. And even here, you know, he deserved a podium finish for what he did yesterday. So it's phenomenal, you know, what his performance has been this year. And we talk about, you know, tyre management a hell of a lot. And we say that Lewis Hamilton's really, really good at it. But Sergio Perez is probably the best out there. And he's been the best out there since 2010 on his debut in Formula One. So it's quite phenomenal, you know, what Sergio Perez has been able to do with his career. And now he's in the team that's given a world champion in Formula One. And Sergio Perez is there as a support role. I don't think he's ever going to get his chance to win a championship now, but if anyone deserves to have a crack at it, it's got to be Sergio. You know, he's been absolutely fantastic. And he is what kept that championship fight interesting and exciting in the mid-phase of the race. And it was clean, it was hard, it was fair, and he totally played the team game. In the latter half of the season, I don't think Valtteri Bottas, since he was announced as leaving the team, has ever played the team game in quite the same way. So Sergio Perez definitely has a heck of a lot to be, you know, impressed by the world. I think everybody needs to give him a lot of credit for what he did out there.
Lisanne, without that defence, obviously the defence was cancelled out essentially after the late race shenanigans, I would call it. But either way, I think personally, I was debating whether Sergio Perez should be at Red Bull after the midpoint of this year. Obviously, he's had a much more impressive second half to the season now after Turkey, really. Turkey was sort of the turning point of his season, a triple podium, nearly missing out in Brazil. Obviously, the charge in Qatar, unfortunately, wasn't able to catch Alonso. This race, I think now, personally, has placed him in that Red Bull car. He showed, and he didn't just show, he made it clear that seat was his. He did what Albon couldn't. He did what Gasly couldn't. He is there to stay for a few years at least.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that personally, I thought Checo was already throughout the season the good number 2. I think people were pretty harsh on him. He had to get used to it. It's a different type of car, different chassis, different setup. You have to get used to that. And I think he had a lot to learn, but I always thought that he showed that he is that second driver because he has been up there with Max. Not always. He has also had some bad incidents, but I thought like one thing that Red Bull issue is patience with drivers, and constantly changing people also doesn't help them in any way. So them prolonging his contract made for me a lot of sense, and I think they made a right decision because especially after yesterday, I just remember screaming, and that's a real number 2 driver, the real team. That's a team thing you're doing. Just really defending it, making the gap just up to 1 second. It was just prestige, and I think he is safe in the team. It seems like him and Max are a good pairing in general. He has not a lot of I think young drivers sometimes have a bit of an ego still left in a certain extent. He, of course, has still an ego, but he also understands what it is to drive for a team and not to drive just for yourself. And it's good for Red Bull to stay patient and see what he can do next season. I mean, what would have happened if they had the same thing that they waited until the last race. Well, they would have probably kept him. But because Albon was already going to Williams and stuff like that. But I think he is a really, really strong driver. A lot of experience, exactly what they needed. Because Gasly was too young, put in a seat. Albon was too fast, put in a seat. And this is what they needed. A driver that has been in the sport, that has been in different teams, that cares about the team. Because in Force India and in Racing Point, he really cared for those teams. And I think that that's the same sentiment he still holds. And I think he's the best pairing for Max at the moment. And I just hope that they keep him for longer if Max stays as well. It would be great because he deserves it. And he deserves also podiums. With the driving he shows, like, it's prestige. And I think he should stay.
Now, the other person who really helped Max Verstappen win this World Championship, although he didn't really do it intentionally, despite the conspiracy theories that Alex Albon asked him to crash, Nicholas Latifi. In the final 5 laps of the Grand Prix, Nicholas Latifi hit the barrier at turn 14, bringing out the safety car. This was after a previous virtual safety car, which did nothing to affect the strategy as we thought it might. It closed up the pack. The whole... I want to just limit this to the Latifi accident for now.
Yeah.
Surely I don't want to jump into the aftermath itself until afterwards. But the whole Latifi accident almost acted as a catalyst for what would come.
It's unfortunate because people are going to be very short-sighted about this whole affair. There is no way in hell that Nicholas Latifi would have instigated an accident to rob Lewis Hamilton of a championship. He's far too focused on giving Williams a decent result to end the season. Why on earth would he take any involvement? I mean, it's just anybody who thinks this is some kind of conspiracy theory to rob Hamilton of a championship is moronic and needs to change glasses because they're clearly not seeing what the rest of the world should be seeing. He was in a fantastic battle with Mick Schumacher. They're two teams that are trying to beat each other, give themselves a nice pat on the back going into the winter for motivation, for morale, for team spirit. And it happens. You know, we saw a couple of times that weekend. We saw an accident from Raikkonen in practice. We saw Bottas running wide and striking the barriers. You know, it's a tough corner now and they're still learning it. They're still getting used to it. And when the back end snaps, it just snaps without warning. So it's just one of those things, you know, it's just one of those things. And I don't think anybody should be hurling abuse at Nicholas Latifi for an is that Glock sort of conspiracy. It's motor racing. If you want them all to stay rigidly to the circuit and end it boring, well, then fine. But you can't deny the fact that it set up the most unbelievable finish to a Formula One season in history. And as from a sporting point of view, you know, Formula One is raking it in now as a result of this. You know, it's absolutely in vogue. It's being talked about in every news channel, on every television station, on every radio channel. It is absolutely in vogue. So from Formula One's point of view, for Latifi to crash like that, it's unfortunate, but it gave us the showdown that we were all kind of expecting. It's unfortunate. It's a shame. But you can't really call out Nicholas Latifi for doing anything wrong. He's a racing driver. Do you want him to park it at the side of the road and give up? No, he's not going to do that.
Although, Jake, despite the fact that you mentioned there the Timo Glock situation, it's kind of interesting because we almost ourselves created the new quote that is going to be quoted for years to come. Because whereas the whole situation then was, is that Glock? I don't know about everyone else, but I was sat there shouting at my TV, "Oh my God, Latifi!" preceded by Verstappen.
Yeah.
Just a complete. We ourselves there created the quote because the amount of people that I saw putting that on social media.
It is fascinating. And do you know, I think the way that this has played out, I think, has actually been. It was funny the other day. This is not going to seem relevant, but the other day I saw a clip of David Bowie being interviewed in 1999 talking about the power of the internet, and we haven't actually seen how powerful the internet's going to be. And it's funny because we're kind of seeing that play out now. The internet has actually played a massive part in this season. And I think a lot more than people are willing to give it credit for. because there is so much being talked about it, because it is so in vogue, and so, so many people feel they have to give their 2 cents worth as to who is making good decisions. Verstappen's doing this, Hamilton's doing this, Michael Massey's doing this. It really has coloured the entire championship, because now there is so much pressure on every faction that to make the right decision is clearly going to be the wrong decision for another faction. And it's just going to continue to create this wave of toxicity. It's fascinating because people just don't know when to end it. They just don't know when their 2 cents worth is not the most important opinion that people are going to read that day. So it is fascinating how it's kind of got out of control. And I think those last 5 laps were kind of the brewing of the volcano, and then it just kind of erupted. And I do think social media has a massive role to play in how that's all unraveled.
I think I would agree with you on that point. It's been one of those seasons. It's been a weird, wacky season. But Lisanne, whilst Nicholas Latifi was pointing his car on fire to the marshals, meanwhile Max Verstappen was pulling into the pits for a fresh set of soft tyres, as was Sergio Perez. Unfortunately, Perez didn't finish the race. Although it was a bit of a strategy masterclass from Red Bull, because at that point, what did they have to lose? On the other hand, Mercedes really screwed up there. They really screwed up, because although Hamilton was very, very close to the pits, not like we haven't seen Hamilton dive into the pits before very, very last minute.
Yeah, it was a gamble they took. I mean, for Red Bull, it was mostly all or nothing. They could just go in and do it, because what did they have to lose? They were already second. It didn't matter at that point. It was smart to put him on a soft, and I think both times Mercedes has this season. Normally, I've always found that Mercedes was a really level-headed team, knew what to do with strategy. We have seen multiple times this season that Red Bull has had the leverage in strategy and just are more easier trigger happy, don't dare to take more risks than Mercedes is. And I think that showed yesterday. It really showed that Mercedes maybe is a bit too patient. I have heard a lot of different opinions that people think it wouldn't have worked out for Lewis to go in, but I think it would have. And I mean, we can talk long what happened with the safety car and then we start again, but yeah, it would have helped him a lot if we were fresh tires. At one point Norris got already a puncture, and it was dangerous at one point, even before the safety car came out. Like, I know Lewis is good at tire management, but still, it was the question of, like, will those tires last? Especially after seeing Norris getting a puncture. And I think not boxing him in that moment, and he said it himself on the radio, was not as smart. They should have probably brought him in and dared to take that risk. But I think all they thought what they were doing is playing the safe game. I think they even thought that the safety car would stay in until the last round. So it's really interesting to see. And that's why I think that maybe this showed that Red Bull sometimes takes more risks, but the risks pay off.
Can I just say, and Jake, you'll understand where I've got this metaphor from, because we were talking about it in the car the other day. Formula One, in my opinion, is like a boxing match. Although there are different points awarded for each round, although you can win each round, this race was divided up into segments, and each lap was a segment, and every driver scored their amount of points. Now, in my personal opinion, those final laps, Mercedes lost the fight. Because although they had absolutely nailed it in this Grand Prix, they had covered off Verstappen, they'd done everything they needed to do, they failed. They absolutely failed. I don't care what people say. We'll move on to the whole shenanigans afterwards. I don't care what people say. Mercedes dropped the ball. Mercedes have provided 3 consecutive race wins for Lewis Hamilton. 3 race wins, which they fought for. This could have been a 4th. This could have been their 8th double world championship. They did not pit Lewis Hamilton. They did not think like Red Bull. Red Bull, what did they have to lose? They boxed him. won. It's as simple as that.
I completely agree. On both occasions, actually, during the VSC and then during the safety car period, they had time and opportunity and reason to pit because they knew that Red Bull might take the gamble. I cannot understand why. I know that their argument is track position here is king. But look, lap one proved that Max will go for a gap if given the opportunity, and it'll be up to Lewis to decide whether there's going to be a crash or not. It's as simple as that. So with that context playing in mind, how does a team like Mercedes allow an advantage to be given like that to the opposition? I mean, it just doesn't equate. I can't quite figure out in my mind why the Mercedes team weren't on standby with tyres, ready to see what Red Bull did. If they were there in the pits, ready with tyres, the second that Red Bull sprung into action, they could have gone, right, go, move. They're getting a stop, ready, go. React to it. They had to play them off against each other. The fact that they took the gamble, it's putting all that weight of expectation on Lewis. And yes, Lewis is the greatest of all time. But look, that final lap, it was the equivalent of a 100-meter sprint with Max Verstappen wearing sneakers and Lewis wearing nothing, running the race barefoot. It was completely unequal. And to me, it just didn't make any sense that Mercedes wouldn't try and counteract whatever Red Bull did. Now, Red Bull, they got the strategy perfect. Absolutely spot on. They knew, right, well, the only way we're going to beat him is if we've got the better tyres. So on both occasions, they played it perfectly. And you have to say that Red Bull have, on that front, as a team, earned the World Championship. On that front, again, Max Verstappen's driving, perfect. Got it absolutely spot on. Red Bull as a team strategy, perfect. Got it right every single time. It's baffling to me that Mercedes didn't react to that and didn't suspect that Red Bull were going to try and play that and just go for the whole, well, track position is king. Track position is king. Well, yes, it is. But the track's been updated for this year. It's a faster, more flowing, more aggressive racetrack now. And Max has already proven that he'll go for those gaps on those corners. So why wouldn't you try and even up the score? It baffles me that they let that one slip.
Now, as Verstappen caught the back of the safety car train, one thing stood between him and Lewis Hamilton, or should I realistically say 4 to 5 things, because there were lapped cars. Lapped cars were separating the two championship contenders. The lapped cars were let through, and then the safety car immediately was drawn. Now, looking at the letter of the law, that shouldn't really have happened, because there should have been a lap left between. However, when has the FIA followed the letter of the law this year?
I think that's the key factor, isn't it, Lisanne? That's the key factor, essentially, is that the inconsistency isn't there.
Yeah, it's funny how we always how we say that a driver, world champion should be consistent, and I expect at least the governing body to be consistent, and I think that's the whole issue this season. And it doesn't even matter who you're a fan of. Like, you can see what's going on, that it doesn't make sense anymore. First of all, they said that no cars need to be unlapped. That they don't have to be let go. And then all of a sudden it changes. And that also brings a doubt of what happened there. It shows that they don't know. It almost looks like they don't know what they're doing. There is a lot. I know there's pressure on them, don't get me wrong. But if you're in this position of power of a sport as big as Formula One, and it should be in every sport, you should play fair. Don't let the pressure get to you. And I've heard people say that it has to do with either Christian Horner screaming in we were gonna go Michael Massey's ear, or somebody else. It can be Toto, but he shouldn't be influenced by this. And that's the whole interesting thing for me, is that it is one moment that way, it's the other moment that way. We saw it in Brazil, that one thing can happen, the other thing can't happen. We've seen it last week. It was all of a sudden nothing was allowed anymore. It's it changes every time so much that I think if you're not consistent as the governing body, what kind of message do you give? Also to drivers, it feels like there's favoritism maybe for certain drivers. Not saying that it exists, but like, it looks like that way. It starts to look that way. Also, you allow people to get to speculate about your fairness. Like, I heard people naming match fixing. I heard people saying crazy things like that. And that's the thing, is like, if you do these things and you're not consistent with your judging, it doesn't make sense anymore. And I think for the sport and for the drivers, it's just really hard to follow what's going on, and for fans as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it was the perfect storm, essentially. Michael Massey, as far as I can tell, was pressured into making decisions on the hop. The very first call under the safety car, Toto Wolff radioed him, "Don't throw a red flag." I mean, how do you not at that situation go, "It's not up to you. It's not your decision. Leave it out. You focus on running your race team. If you don't like it, go play cricket." How is that not your first response? Honestly, how is that not your first call? You're the race director. You're in charge. Toto Wolff is not in charge. Christian Horner is not in charge. It's Michael Massey. So if that had been me and it said, "Don't throw the red flag," I'd say, "It's not up to you. I will throw what rule needs to be thrown." And to be honest, that was the right call. The right call at that point was to red flag the race and give them a 4-lap sprint so they could change tyres and be on an equal playing field. If that had been the way it had gone down, it would have been up to the drivers. It would not have been up to the FIA at that point. And that's how the World Championship should have been played out. The biggest issue that I can identify with this is that, they've obviously said, well, we're not going to let lap cars through because we don't have time. And then to suddenly change their mind and let the cars in between the two championship protagonists through. There was no warning that they were going to do that. There was no previous precedent that they were going to do that. And there was certainly no explanation as to why they were going to do that. Now, this doesn't just affect the two drivers battling for the championship. This also affects the drivers behind, who were not allowed to go through because they were in a race themselves. So Daniel Ricciardo, Lance Stroll, they were not allowed to unlap themselves. They were bitterly unhappy about it as well because they were fighting in a race with the guys in front of them. They could have made places. They could have improved their position. Carlos Sainz in third position. On the restart, he had lapped cars between him and Max Verstappen. Now, if that restart had been called correctly, he could have had a challenge to fight for second or even the win. Let's say that Verstappen and Hamilton had been close enough on equal tyres to battle and they had collision and taken each other out. Carlos Sainz could have won his first Grand Prix for Ferrari. That's genuinely something that could have happened. I actually feel for Carlos in all of that because he wasn't given a fair chance to race for the win. So it's not just about the Hamilton-Verstappen situation. It's about all the other repercussions and all the other consequences. So it genuinely does look as though they've basically crumbled to peer pressure, first from Toto and then from Christian. So I personally am of the opinion, if you look in other sports, in football, in rugby, the referee's word is law. That's what they decide. Even if the virtual replay, the post replay says something different, the word is law. Then you can start having an issue about it afterwards. But that guy's word is law. In gymnastics, in professional gymnastics in the Olympics, the coaches are not allowed to speak to the judges in any context unless it's a life-threatening situation. In Formula One, goodness knows what the policy is now, because clearly it's become so much a part of the show that we want to know what's going on. It's none of our business. We have no business knowing what is the form between, the team manager and the race director. We have no business knowing, and it's actually spoilt it for me.
I think that's the feelings of most people now, to be honest with you. We'll get to our thoughts on the FIA later, but they really dropped the ball as they have for this season. But that's a conversation for about 5 minutes' time. Either way, one thing which was slightly poetic about it, Lisanne, was we spoke quite a lot about the fact that it was almost poetic that it was the final race it came down to. It wasn't the final race, it was the final lap. One last overtake from Max Verstappen. Frankly, one amazing overtake from Max Verstappen. I know he was on fresher tyres, but when you're that aggressive against Lewis Hamilton, you've got to take your hat off to someone. At the end of the day, it wasn't Verstappen who controlled that decision. It wasn't Red Bull who opted for that decision. It was the FIA's decision. Red Bull utilised it. Max Verstappen is your world champion.
Yeah, I mean, they played it smart. That's all they did. They there is an opportunity given to them, and they took it, and that's the way you should be. And there's a lot to say about how this ended and how, like, I think he is championship worthy, but there has been a lot of different opinions about this because of this ending. But I think it is also about the mindset of doing this, taking that chance, pitting, going on the tires. They did that. They took the chance. They were smart about it. Max did it, as he always loves to say, simply lovely. He overtook Lewis, kept the position, kept defending, closed the doors, and he got it in the end. And I think it got to him today a bit. I think at the end, when before the safety car, when Lewis was far away and Max tried to catch up, but it was too far to do. The emotions that came out afterwards, I think that there was a lot of pressure on him today to perform, of course, and to do it in that last lap and do it in a clean and safe way, because it could have also gone differently, right? They could have taken each other out, and then still Max would have been the champion. So he did it simply lovely, great overtakes, and I think it showed a bit that he is still deserving of this championship. And I think people forget that because of the controversy, and it's sad to see, because we can all say that he made some silly mistakes this year with aggression towards the end of the season, but he still had a beautiful season, and I think whoever would have won, even if Lewis would have won, they both deserved it. So to overtake, to take it all and just do it in one last lap is crazy, but he did it, and he did it well.
Jake, your thoughts on the crowning of the first Dutch world champion?
Oh, there's no doubt in my mind that he deserves to be world champion. They both do. I agree with Lisanne. I think essentially, whichever one of them won the title, it was a justified world championship win. And Max deserves to be world champion. There's no question about that in my mind. And I'm fairly sure in any hardcore motor racing fan's mind, Verstappen deserves to be world champion. So did Lewis, an 8th time. It was always going to be tough as to who won it. I think what really leaves a bit of taste in the mouth is that we're never really going to know who would have won the world championship in a fair fight. And that's what makes people feel bitter about it. And I think people are a little bit naive in thinking that Max doesn't deserve the championship, because he totally does. As do Red Bull, as do Mercedes. What they didn't deserve was for the result to be manipulated in a crass manner. And that's the difficulty. If the red flag had come at lap 54, we would have had 4 clean laps of racing with some DRS, with equal tyres, and it would have been sensational. And we really would know who the ultimate worthy world champion was. There's no question in my mind that Verstappen deserves to be world champion, but we should have had the race result the way it was meant to play out, not this way.
At the end of the day, I have said this from the very beginning of the championship. I have not known who was going to be world champion. At my previous job, I told everyone I thought it was going to be Verstappen, because I thought Red Bull had the advantage. In my race coverage, especially pre-season, I changed my mind, in all honesty with you. I looked back on the past few seasons and I thought Lewis would take it. Even before the season started, I wasn't sure who was going to win. That's been the case throughout this entire season. I thought Max had it nailed on, in Austria especially. But we asked you, the listeners and fans of Downforce Radio, we wanted your opinions on the championship battle. Isaac Smith on Instagram called it shambles. We've got Alex Bomberg simply saying, I need a lie down. JB93 Motorsport, the true champion won. Shannon Corbett, Max deserved the championship but did not deserve that race win at all. Go over to Facebook. Jordan Walkerdine, I hope I pronounced that correctly. A lot to unpack. I don't think the title should change hands now. Max crossed the line first on the lap that mattered most. Jacob Jackson, the stewards and race directors' decisions in this race reflect the poor decisions and a couple controversial decisions over this season. I think the best one, Toby Owen Racing, MX5 driver. Farewell, Kimmy, and thanks for all the memories. That's that's another thing we'll certainly be getting to in a moment's time. But one thing I have to say You'll notice in the plan for the podcast that isn't a spelling mistake. Michael Messi is Downforce Radio's nickname for Michael Messi. Formula One has always labelled itself. Right? It's always labelled itself the technological masterclass of motorsport. It has labelled itself a sport. It has labelled itself anything. This season has been Drive to Survive Season 4, and I don't mean the TV show. This season has been Drive to Survive Season 4, although it's been wonderful to have a change, to have a bit of an odd season where it's drama after drama after drama. It's been fantastic. The FIA should not be involved in that. They have been making poor decisions since 1993.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to point out, and I think you have a point. 1993 is a very poignant year to come back to, because obviously that relates to the decision to ban all electronic devices from Formula One cars when they've been integral to the design of a Formula One car going into 1994. So to ask them to then remove all those electronic devices was ridiculously short-sighted. And I think it did lead to a lot of the controversy that we saw in the 1994 season. I agree with you on that. This has been a difficult season for motor racing in terms of a contentious decision-making process. We saw that in the World Endurance Championship finale last month, in fact, in the season finale in Bahrain, when Ferrari and Porsche ended up taking each other out of the race, essentially. Ferrari ramming into the back of the Porsche, being told to give the place back, and due to a pit stop, they deleted the request. And Porsche still feel cheated by the governing body, and that Ferrari basically took them out of the race and there was no penalty given to them. So, it's always very difficult. It's a contentious position to be in as race director. It's a period of transition after, the passing of our dearly beloved Charlie Whiting, who basically nobody really ever said a bad word about him. And that's a difficult position to be in when, you're in the spotlight all of a sudden, having to take over from a guy who everybody loved. And it's difficult. The problem I find with it is that he clearly hasn't had the backbone he needed. If people are asking him to do things, it can't be their influence. It cannot be their influence. And I come back to the gymnastics analogy. Coaches are not allowed to speak to the judges at any point during the event. And I think that is essentially what we need in Formula One. I think it's got to the point where the only way to keep this fair, the only way to avoid that kind of controversy, is to say, well, teams are not allowed to speak with the race director until after the race. You can make a note of all of these grievances and then we'll come back to it, because there's just too much pressure. There's too much riding on it. It was too influential to have those two guys chatting in his ear and making these calls. And that's the problem. It's kind of robbed us of a sporting element, and people have a reason to think that it's been fixed. I don't think it was fixed. I think it was clumsy. I think it was a little bit short-sighted in every respect. And if we had just gone with the Baku policy, stop the race, give us 3 or 4 laps of racing, nobody would have any complaints.
Lisanne, the FIA have had several nicknames over the years. I think Ron Dennis labelled them Ferrari International Assistants. Fans have called them the Mafia in response to Mercedes' dominance over the last few years. I don't think they've favoured anyone this year. I think in all honesty, this is going to sound very harsh. Michael Massey should hand in his notice, the way I see it, because this year has not been I personally, 2019 when Massey came in, although Charlie Whiting was dearly missed this season, I think that's not safe to say, but I must admit I did like the Michael Massey's approach in 2019. Although there was some odd decisions, I liked his approach. I liked the way he went about it. It just seems like he's almost cracking under the pressure of the spotlight.
I think Michael's Massey's falling point is like the fact that it's now broadcasted. When I first saw this graphic pop up, I was like, yes, we can hear this, because, even though I'm a Formula One fan, we sometimes love the drama, right? We love to hear Toto scream over the radio, but it turned around for me pretty fast, especially this race. And I think for Michael Massey made questionable mistakes, and I think especially this race, he said things, and I don't know if he must be aware that this is sent out into the world what he says, and I think he didn't take that well, and I don't think I agree with Jake on that they shouldn't talk to Michael Massey during a race, and the fact that it's also broadcasted millions of people that have opinions about these things, like that would be like every referee. I don't know, I haven't watched football in a while, but do they wear mics? I don't believe so. It's like, there is this, what is like for entertainment and what is for the sport, and I think for the sports, decision is now better to maybe not show these conversations. Then there's of course an opposite opinion about that. Is like, well, then they do it behind doors. What's the difference? Yeah. And that's also an issue. So I think like Michael Massey needs, like, I don't wish anybody to lose their jobs, don't get me wrong, but I think it's better for him and the integrity of the FIA to leave. And maybe like, take the spotlight is maybe not made for the FIA director, and maybe keep like but I think it should be what Jake said. No talking to Michael Massey or anybody that takes over his job during the race. The poor man, like we can say anything about him as a racing director, but I don't wish to be in his position. Let's be honest, like the hate he must get now. This man, we're in front of Christmas, Like, I feel bad in a certain extent. It's still a human being, And I think we all can make mistakes. I just think he is not right for the position. And this has been, and I didn't even say this, like, this is not the first time I said this after this race. This has been a conversation we had over the last 2 weeks already. So I think for him, and also for him personally, it's better to take his stuff and find a job, maybe in another division or anything else where he can be happy and not be hated on millions of people. Because let's be honest, I thought that this season Mazepin would be the most hated person in F1, but that changed real fast, and that's crazy to think. But it's sad. But I also understand why people are angry at him.
Final point about this year's World Championship. Until obviously we get round to it all again in a few weeks' time. Mercedes have launched an intention to appeal. Now, whether or not they will appeal is still up to decision. They've got till the end of Wednesday, 96 hours, which is actually, it's nothing to do with the FIA prize-giving gala. It's complete coincidence that this 96-hour window falls just as the trophy will be done. Jake, your last point, Mercedes, they aren't going to drop this. Let's face it, they're going to take this to the Court of Arbitration of Sport.
Yeah, totally they are. You don't invest millions of pounds worth of money to have a result stripped like that with no inconsistency and no warning. I have a feeling that Mercedes won't let this lie, and it actually has the potential to backfire big time on F1. Mercedes don't like the way this has played out. They could leave. It sounds crazy and it sounds extremist, but all it takes is for a car company, i.e. Daimler AG, to think, well, it's not worth it anymore. We'll invest somewhere else. And they could go to Le Mans. They could go and reinvest in Formula E. It's genuinely possible. Stranger things have happened. So if Mercedes pull out of Formula One, then you haven't just lost one team. You've lost the engine supplier for 5 other teams. And that's massive. That's revolutionary for the sport. They've got to be very careful how they play this. At the same time, if Red Bull have the result go against them in the Court of Arbitration, Red Bull could pull out. And that's Red Bull and AlphaTauri gone. 2 more teams disappearing. Now, this seems extremist, and people are going to look at this and go, yeah, they'd never do that. Stranger things have happened in the world of automobile industry. This is very, very brittle, and now this is fever pitch. All it takes is for one side not to like the outcome, and they'll say, well, we'll go play with our toys somewhere else. This is so volatile, and it has the potential to be the most controversial thing to ever hit motorsport. It genuinely does have that potential. What happens in these next few weeks and heading into January with the Court of Arbitration of Sport could define motorsport. And who's to say it couldn't make the sport implode? We've seen in IndyCar, they were unified, then they split into 2 factions, the Indy Racing League and Champ Cars, and then finally 13 seasons later, they unified again. The World Sports Car Championship evaporated. It imploded in upon itself. Group B rallying imploded in upon itself. touring cars. There was a World Championship, then there wasn't. Now there's a WTCR. Super Touring completely exploded. The only form of motor racing that has stayed consistent throughout that time is Formula One. Every other discipline of motorsport has had its endgame and resuscitation. Formula One has been very fortunate. There's not to say that this could not be the start of the transition. No sport is safe, so they've got to be so careful how they play this from now on.
I think that's This really is something which could come to bite the sport where it hurts. One thing though that I'm sure we will all be happy about. One thing I'm sure that every single person can get around, especially you, Lisanne. You predicted this last week. Carlos Sainz on the podium. Really, really nice to see. Carlos Sainz, one of the nicest guys in Formula One at the moment, and that's really all to say about it.
Yeah, I mean, I predicted this, and it was kind of a wild guess, but I think he has had a really consistent season. And with the help, of course, of Mercedes, their engine change was really, really great for the team. That brought them to third in the Constructor Championship. I think Carlos Sainz is one of those drivers that goes under the radar a lot, but deserves a lot of more applause. Like, let's see where he is now. He's at Ferrari, came into a team where there is a golden boy, and it's the same with Red Bull and Max. There's a golden boy. You enter, you're technically already a step behind. He enters this new team and immediately is up to pace. Yes, he had some shunts, he had some issues, but he did it, and he did it really well. And I think that he deserves every podium. He deserves a win. I hope he will get it one day. And I think he will be a future world champion. He has shown that he can do it. He has shown, and I'm going to say this, that Ferrari's golden boy is maybe not the golden boy they needed. Like, Charles Leclerc, in all due respect, is a great driver, and I think that a lot of people would have been scared to enter this team next to him. But I think Carlos exactly did what he had to do, and he did it simply lovely. I'm going to say it again. And he deserves every podium he got. I think he is sometimes underrated. He gets more underrated now, but I wish him all the best, and I think we can see a future world champion in him. And that changed this season in comparison. I always thought he had talent, but I think this season he really showed where he was made of.
One man who has certainly not shied away from showing how much talent he has is Kimi Räikkönen. Now, I won't bore anyone with my memories of Kimi Räikkönen. I grew up watching him. As I've said before, two of my first memories, Jenson Button's first win, and the second race I remember watching Kimi Räikkönen won, 2007 Shanghai. Now, I remember that for obvious reasons, because my dad was a massive Alonso fan. Hamilton put it in the gravel. I think everyone in this listening to this show can probably put the pieces together there, why I remember so vividly that race. Kimi Räikkönen, he didn't have the best end to his career, retirement with a retirement. But I think everyone has to say thank you, Kimi, for what you've done for the sport. I've been very, very critical of Kimi Räikkönen over the last few years. I've said he should have retired after 2018. I think that would have been a good way to end his career. But at the end of the day, he didn't. He stuck around to mentor Antonio Giovinazzi. Alfa Romeo didn't go the way which I'm sure Kimi would have hoped. But nonetheless, goodbye, Kimi, and thank you.
Yeah, 100% goodbye, Kimi. Like, what a legend. Let's be honest, if it is not for his on-drive actions, for his off-track antics, like, this man is a type of person that you don't see often in the sport. I mean, let's be honest, most of them love to be in the spotlight. Some don't, but some of them do. They love to talk. Well, Kimi doesn't. Kimi stayed Kimi, and Kimi will always be Kimi. And I think he has a great, motorsport career. I mean, he went rallying, he went to car, and to come back into F1, he did he did it just great. And I think it for especially like newer fans, like of course what they've mostly seen of him is more in the back of the pack, and of course that's sad to hear because like he is such a talented driver. Maybe he should have retired earlier, but I think for him, like he said, it's a hobby for him in the end, and he may not always show his appreciation, but I'm pretty sure he loves the sport. Otherwise, he wouldn't have stayed a couple of more years. People will maybe bring up the argument that it's because of money, but I don't believe so. I think we will miss Kimmy, right? Like, even though he doesn't say a lot, he says a lot at the same time. He brought great quotes, great moments. I just hope he has his drink. I hope he has his gloves and his steering wheel. And sad to see him retire this way. But it's also sort of in a Kimmy way. I think he didn't want the spectacle in the end. He didn't want to do the donuts, maybe. He didn't want to do the radio of the driver of the day. So I think for him it was kind of, I'm out of it all. And it's such a Kimmy way to go out of it. Yeah, and sad that Antonio Giovinazzi was also leaving in a similar way. He is, of course, has always a chance of coming back, but yeah, we know how everyone works sometimes. But yeah, big ups to Kimi. I hope he will have a lot of time to spend with his family and his little ice cubes. And yeah, all the best for the future. And maybe we'll see him back, but in a different position in Sauber, because we all heard the rumors, right?
Yeah, indeed. That's a point to touch on a different day. Those rumours have been going around for some time now. Like so many other things in Formula One, you never know. George Russell, the final point of the day, the final point of the season. Left Williams looking rather quite fancy, really. The Kingsman, the Kingsman prequel, sponsoring the car, walking around in his three-piece suits with an umbrella, Lisanne. Although obviously it wasn't the way he wanted to go out, he certainly did it stylishly.
Yeah, I was first like I was not aware of this partnership going on with the Kingsman, and I was like, what is he doing? Like, what happened to him? This season went to his head at one point, I thought, but then I was like, oh no, it's probably a stunt. I mean, it was a great season for George Russell. To end it this way in Williams is maybe not the way he wanted to, but yeah, he did it in style. I think one thing that he has a lot of love for the Williams team. I mean, you saw that, like, one thing that I always think of Williams is they might not be up the pack, but they seem like a really not happy always, but healthy team. Sometimes the dynamics seem really great. They're really happy, genuinely happy when things happen. Of course, with the passing of Sir Frank Williams, it was a seasons of ups and downs for them, and they came a long way, and they had it. For George Russell to move to Mercedes, I think everybody that was like this week that had a race that would change teams or leave the sport had not a great race. Also for Bottas, don't think it was the ending he expected to have, but I think Russell's prepared to go to the team. I mean, this was his end goal for always and ever, and he can be proud of what he did at Williams, and we are, I think, or at least I am curious what he can do in Mercedes. And yeah, I look forward to that. And let's hope that he does really well in Mercedes. And I hope that Williams also has a great team with Latifi and Albon. That will be a really interesting thing to.
Thank you very much, Jake, and thank you very much, Lisanne. And a big thank you to everyone who has supported this radio show. This has been an endeavour I wanted to start quite some time, working with Downforce Radio, and to see the support that we've got this year has been absolutely immense. So once again, thank you very much from me, Lisanne, everyone at Downforce Radio. Have a very Merry Christmas. I hope you have enjoyed this season as much as we have, but it's not over yet, because we're going to be reviewing the Formula One World Championship battle very soon. So stick around, keep an eye out for that. Very, very nice holiday season. Goodbye.